Okay, in this video I am going to be going over the basic concepts of fitted mesh, a little bit of a history of how it came to be, because it's good to know, because that way you'll understand more of the limitations of fitted mesh, so that you'll have an idea when you're working with fitted mesh what it can do and what it can't do, what you can compensate for and what you can't compensate for. You'll understand some of the terminology and why it came to be called what it's called. Okay, so we start off with a scene, and we have our average default mesh avatar. That is this actually is just the default mesh avatar. It's not quite the same as the default mesh or default shape in Second Life, often referred to as Ruth. That is this particular shape. Okay, so every avatar has an invisible mesh that they're wearing, called the collision skeleton. It's not a skeleton in the sense that the skeleton that it's not a skeleton like this. It's actually just a mesh, and it's only a skeleton in name only. And I'll show you what it looks like. That's what the collision skeleton looks like. And it is rigged to what is referred to as the collision bones. And the difference between the collision bones is there are what called normal bones, or M bones, which are all the bones in the skeleton that start with a lowercase m and then a capital letter and then the rest of the name. Those are all considered the normal bones, or the M bones. All the ones that are in uppercase only with no little lowercase m in front of them are considered the collision bones. And their original purpose was for this mesh here, the collision skeleton, to be rigged to. And the original job, or the current job, because it's still doing the same job, the collision skeleton, it's only a skeleton in the sense that it's underneath the skin. I guess that's why they called it a skeleton. The collision skeleton has been around in Second Life since almost the beginning. I'm sure it wasn't right there in the beginning in the beta version, but once Second Life went live, that they had the collision skeleton. Now, the job of the collision skeleton is to, when something hits your avatar, or when your avatar bumps into something, it uses this simpler mesh to calculate where on the body it was hit, or made the collision. And so that's why it's called the collision skeleton. And it's a very simple mesh in that it's much easier to calculate where it hits with this very simple mesh than with the actual avatar mesh. Your actual avatar mesh in Second Life is a phantom. It actually doesn't, it's a phantom, it's a ghost. It doesn't actually hit anything. Just like you can make a prim a phantom. The mesh avatar itself is a phantom. And then you have this collision skeleton that actually is what calculates and is solid and gets hit. Now, you'll notice that we have these two pec bones. Well, those were added later. And you can see that I guess they figured that this little point out here was enough to represent the breasts if something were to hit the body. And so the collision skeleton needed to change, the collision skeleton mesh needed to change shape to sort of match the rough shape volume of your avatar, so that if you were to, say, change the size of the hands, so let's go down here to hand size, and you see the avatar's collision skeleton hand gets bigger. Go back to default and apply slider. You see it gets bigger. Now, how it gets bigger is that the vertices of the hands the octahedrons, I think that's what they're called, that's what this shape is called, are rigged 100% to just the hand. This should be just the right hand. And yeah, there's the collision bone for the right hand, and it's weighted 100% or 1 to that bone. So as that bone changes scale, anything that's weighted, any vertex that's weighted to that particular bone will change size. It will get bigger or smaller depending on how, as the scales change. And as you know, you can change the scale of a scale in the 3 axes. You can change it, so you can change it in the Y, X, or Z, and you can also change all 3 at the same time, or 2 of them at the same time. So that changes the hand. So if we were to come here to the outliner and we were to select the the right hand, let's see, where is it? Right hand, right in front of me. Okay, so if we were to select the right hand and we were going to go into scale mode and scale the right hand, you see that the vertices that are weighted in that octahedron, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly. Anyway, you can see it gets bigger or smaller, and that it can change scale like that, or like that, or any combination of the two, to change the hand shape. Well, so that's why they call them collision bones, because they were always in the skeleton, but they were for the collision skeleton. So hence the name collision bones, because the collision skeleton is what the collision skeleton mesh, I should say, is what was calculated when something hit the body, or the body hit something. And so if we were to come in here and to go to the body and change the body size, you can see that the collision skeleton mesh changes shape to roughly match the avatar's volume, the body of the avatar. And so when another method for having closed chain shape called the mesh deformer was in beta testing, somebody came up, it was Red Polly who came up with the idea of rigging to the collision bones so that your mesh clothing would change shape as the collision bones change shape, or change scale. And so that it would change. But there were some problems in that there were nothing to change the breast size. They needed something to change the breast size, so that when the breast size changed, it would make the vertices around the breast clothing get bigger or smaller. So they had to add a number of bones to try to do that. And so they added the pec bones for the breasts, or the pecs. I believe they added the chest bone. They added a butt bone. They added handle bones and belly bones and upper and lower back bones. I think the chest bone might have been there. So they had to add all these extra bones. Now, they forgot to add, and no pun intended, a package bone for the male avatars, so that when they changed the size of the package in the slider under the male, that it would change the clothing as well. They forgot to put that in there, although I could have sworn no, it wasn't it may have been brought up during beta testing. The beta testing for fitted mesh was very short. It was only about 2 months. The beta testing for the mesh deformer was, I believe, almost 2 years. After the first year, it was ready to be released on the main grid. It uses a totally different system for changing the mesh clothing, and maybe I'll get into that later in the video. Now, by definition, fitted mesh is mesh clothing or a mesh avatar that the vertices are weighted only to the collision bones. That's by definition what fitted mesh is. I have heard some people have had success at weighting both to the collision bones and to the normal bones. And so you can weight to both. it wouldn't. I think it would just complicate things even more so, unless you just wanted one particular area of your mesh clothing to be affected by the sliders. Say you had a maternity line of mesh clothing, and you wanted just the belly to affect your maternity clothes, so that when they made their belly bigger, it made the clothes just change the belly size. You could do that, and you could rig the rest of the vertices of your mesh clothing to the normal bones. That is a possibility. But by definition, fitted mesh is only rigged to, or weighted to, the collision bones. You actually have to have all the normal bones or the M bones in the skin cluster or in the DAE file. They have to be in the skin cluster so that when you make your DAE file, they'll be in the DAE file. They have to be defined. So all the normal bones have to be defined even in the DAE file, even if they don't have any vertices weighted to them. You don't have to use all of the collision bones in the DAE file. So you could just rig to just the collision bones that you're going to be using. So if you're going to do a bikini top, you could, or a tube top, you could just rig to just the left and right pec and the upper back and the chest bone, and not rig to any of the other collision bones or weight to them. But you would still have to add the normal bones or the M bones to the skin cluster so that they're in the DAE file when you export. So that kind of gives you an idea of why they didn't use the name fitted mesh bones, and they went with collision bones names. I personally think they should not have used the original collision bones because they were at weird rotations and weird scales to start with, and I think it would have been much easier and we would have a lot less headaches had they used brand new bones named fitted mesh bones, that when you had your avatar at the default, or the default mesh, I should say, skeleton, that the rotations and the scales were all, that the rotations were all set to 0 and the scales were all set to 1, 1, and 1 for X, Y, and Z. I think that would have been much easier to rig to, and would have been much less of a headache for me creating this tool for you, because even now we have to deal with the rotations and we have to jump through hoops to deal with those rotations, and that's a whole nother video. So okay, so why is the fitted mesh so difficult to rig to? The reason it's so difficult to rig to and to get a satisfactory result is that most of the avatar does not change shape by having the avatar rigged to the bones to where the bones change shape. I believe it's only the hands and the feet and the head, the overall size of the head, that change size by the M bone that they're rigged to changing scale. Everything else, it's either the bones get longer by changing the scale, so the bones get longer basically, or they change shape by morphs. You know, what's commonly referred to as morphs. In Maya, they're called blend shapes. So blend shapes, morphs are the same thing. As you can see, like, watch the arms. You know, this is the default mesh. This is the default mesh, and this is the size and shape of the avatar when you create a new shape in Second Life and wear it for the first time. You know, when you create a new shape in your outliner. And so notice that the arms get longer. Now that's because they did change the scales of the M bones, but only in one direction, only in the Y direction. And that made the arms get longer. Now the avatar mesh itself in Second Life is not rigged at all or weighted at all to the normal, to the collision bones. They're only rigged to the normal or M bones. And when it changes shape, it does not change shape through, like, say, body fat. We'll increase the body fat. It doesn't change its shape. The bones didn't actually move, so they didn't change scale, but the mesh actually changed shape. Now it changed shape by a morph, which is totally different. A morph, I'll give you a real quick example. I'll create a sphere. I'm going to rotate that sphere so it's upright, 90 degrees. What they did to create the morphs is they took the original default mesh, which is what we're seeing now. And she is the shape that even the male avatar was created from. And they made a duplicate of that. So they had the original shape and they had a duplicate. And then they took that duplicate and they started moving vertices around to create different shapes. So they started moving things around. They started using, they might have used the sculpt geometry tool, and so they might have used the sculpt geometry tool, and they may have done it. Oh, I'll do it from the normal, and they might have started doing stuff like that and just reshaping it. I was trying to make kind of a face there, but you can kind of get the point. They didn't necessarily reshape the mesh using a scaling method. They didn't necessarily. I'm sure they did sometimes use a scaling method to reshape the mesh a little bit, but the overall shape was not created by using scales, and so they made a new shape, and then they selected their new shape and said that's going to be the target, and then they held down the shift key and selected the original shape, and then they came here under animation and to deform, and they created a blend shape, and then they came in here, and if you came under here and you select the original and you come in your blend shape, now this sphere 2 is actually the name of this mesh, and they changed it from 0 to 1. Boom. That's how they created the blend shapes for how the avatar changes shape. And at 50% or 0.5, it's halfway between the original. So when they created the breasts, they took the default, made a duplicate, and they resized the breasts, using different techniques. And so it is impossible to create a mesh and have it change shape merely by changing the bone scales and have it follow the shape exactly. It is impossible. Some areas of the body you can get a lot closer than others, and so you should be striving for good enough. You should be striving. So mesh clothing that is very tight and mesh clothing that is very skimpy, that shows a lot of skin, getting an acceptable result, a good enough result, is more difficult, way more difficult than, say, doing a jacket, a loose-fitting jacket or a loose-fitting dress, or something that covers more of the body. Like a wetsuit is easier to get a decent result because you can cover the body with an alpha and hide the places where it pokes through. So those are things that you need to keep in mind. The mesh deformer worked by a totally different method. It used the actual vertices of the mesh avatar itself to make the clothing change as it changed shape. So it was able to have mesh clothing follow the exact shape of the avatar itself. There were some texture distortions, but that could have been dealt with very easily with a little addition to the code. There were places where it would poke out a little bit here and there. That could have been dealt with a smoothing little feature that could have been added. There's a whole bunch of things that could have been added to make it a lot better, and it would have worked a lot better than fitted mesh will ever be able to work. So now you understand blend shapes and morphs, and you kind of understand why it's so difficult to get a really good result. The other reason is that the avatar, the way they set up, the beta testing for fitted mesh was very short, only like 2 months. And I know Oz had very limited resources and very limited number of man hours that he could allocate towards getting fitted mesh up and running. And so it's not as good as it could have been had Oz been given more resources and more time. And you know, it could have been done a lot better, and we would have been able to get better results easier, you know, had some simple things been done. But there was, like I said, I don't particularly understand it, why the mesh deformer was 2 years in beta testing, and after basically the first year it was ready to be released on the grid and worked as well as any fitted mesh, if not better. It was kind of weird. Fitted mesh worked better for very loose-fitting clothing, such as robes and loose-fitting dresses and jackets. But the mesh deformer worked better at skimpier clothing and tighter-fitting clothing than fitted mesh could ever work. And in my opinion, there's a lot more clothes being sold in Second Life that are very tight-fitting and very skimpy, showing a lot of skin, than there are jackets and loose-fitting robes and stuff like that. So I would have gone with the mesh deformer by far. And like I said, things could have been done to it that would have been very easy to add to the I shouldn't say very easy. I do write code. I say it's easy because I see how it works in Maya, and that I use a very similar system for the auto mesh resizing, and that very similar to the mesh deformer. And I see the few extra little controls that I have in Maya that make the auto resizing work even better. And I see how something like with the UV world space little feature that's in Maya, where you pin your UVs, the edges of your UVs automatically, and you have the UV change shape depending on the vertex position in world space, so that you get rid of all the distortions, so that it will compensate for the texture on the mesh when you have a very extreme size, such as, you know, somebody has a very, say, large size. You know, you can see that it does change the shape somewhat. And I'll hide my mesh top. No, I'll hide the thing. You can see that this does change shape, but the textures on it is going to get stretched like crazy. So the fitted mesh has the same problem with texture stretching as the mesh deformer would have had. And so, but the mesh deformer, like I said, we could have added the feature of relaxing the UVs in world space and just pinning the UV borders, which I go over in my video that I'm going to be making for the auto resizing feature. And there's also could have had it deformed from the face instead of the vertice with a mesh deformer. That would have helped. And we could have increased the envelope or decreased the envelope, and had that been a setting, and that would have helped. And we could have had a smoothing feature that's also in Maya that could have been added, and that would have all combined to make the mesh deformer basically be able to make a one-size-fits-all. And so anyway, So anyway, so back to this. Now I've rigged this mesh top. It's almost about 80 or 90% done. It's not going to fit every extreme size. And so if I were to come in here to torso and make the breasts 100%, you see that it follows the breast size quite nicely, at least to the maximum. Once you get down to here, you start to have a little bit of poke through, although an alpha would have been probably acceptable. But once you get down to really small, that may not be really acceptable at all, because it would look like you have these two big holes caving in. So one size fits all will never happen with fitted mesh. You'll have to probably do several different riggings. The mesh will look the same, but the weighting will be different. So you might want to do a weighting for flat-chested avatars or smaller breasted avatars. You could, some things I would not even bother trying to adjust the weights for, such as breast buoyancy. You can see you get some little poke through down here. Not that bad. It would be covered by an alpha. But if you go the opposite direction, you get a lot of poke through. And you get a real problem here. They didn't make the bones move high enough in order, the breastbones themselves really needed to have come up a little bit more. Or the pec bones, I should say, in order to make your mesh come up a little bit higher. That was something that should have been fixed in beta. So don't even bother with up and down to try to adjust the weights for. Don't bother with trying to adjust the that's it, default. Oh yeah, that's because this is still. So don't bother doing the breast cleavage either. It's not too bad on outward. You can see it's coming out just a little bit, but an alpha would cover that fairly well. But the bones don't move quite out far enough. And if you go just the opposite for a lot of inward, you get, this isn't too bad, but if you had a very large breast size, you can see the bones actually move in. Probably don't move in enough. They don't move in enough. Although the more they move in, the more you get stuff pulling in on the side here. So I wouldn't really worry about too much about the cleavage or the breast buoyancy. Unfortunately, I'm not sure because of that how the avatar physics, if they're matching up well enough, or if they could be coming up too high and bouncing too low. So, like I said, you'll have to rely more on alphas. I would primarily just adjust your weights to the breast size, primarily. And this doesn't actually move too bad when we go to the female lock. So it moves fairly well. You do get some poke through down here, but that would be covered by an alpha. If you can get it to this point where it moves fairly well, I think that's going to be, like I said, Strive. It was Medu. I hope I'm pronouncing his words correctly. Or his name correctly. Or Medu. Anyway, he did a wonderful tutorial for MayaStar, where he did a wetsuit, and he made a very good point of, you just want to get the rigging for good enough. You're never going to you will never be able to get it to where it will be one size fits all for all extreme sizes. I think that's about it. I think I covered about everything. And yeah, I think that's about it. So now you know the history, you know where the collision bones came from, that they added more collision bones. I don't know why they're at odd rotations. And and scales to start with. Let's see, what else? I think that's about it. You know how the mesh changes shape because the bones change shape, and you know why fitted mesh is so difficult to get it to follow the actual avatar shape, and in some instances will be impossible to fit under all circumstances. You also have to worry with not only how it changes shape, but you have to worry about how it moves. So that also adds to the difficulty. And the nice thing about the mesh deformer was you just had to rig to the normal bones. You didn't have to rig. So you just had to worry about how does it move, just like regular mesh clothing. And all the old mesh clothing could have been reloaded up and made to work with the mesh deformer with just a couple of clicks. So anyway, I'm a big supporter and fan of the mesh deformer. Even though I made this MayaStar in my attempt to try to help the situation to be better than it is, to make it easier to work with than it is. And so I guess that's about it. I can't think of anything else. I think we've gone over all the basics. So we will see you in the next video. And I'm going to be making a lot more series of how to do everything step by step in MayaStar. So keep an eye out for more videos and subscribe, not just so that you know that when they come. When you subscribe, you get a little note saying, you know, Kathy has put out a new video. And so I'm not trying to monetize the channel or anything like that. So we'll see you in the next video. I actually had stopped recording and then realized that I forgot to go over something that was very important for you to know and understand. Okay, let's put the avatar back into the mesh default. I'm going to hide the avatar, and there's a skeleton. Something you really, really, really need to know is, like I said, we were just going over the different problems that should have been solved in the beta testing for fitted mesh that weren't. One of the biggest problems, other than forgetting a bone for the male package, and I think I already said that earlier, is the leg bones, the upper and lower leg bones. The avatar, when you change your knee angle, the default is 50. It doesn't change the bone. It changes the avatar's knee angle by a morph. And I've already explained to you what blend shapes and morphs are. So this is actually a morph. The bones are not moving whatsoever. And so now Oz and the other Lindens that worked on fitted mesh caught this, and so they made the collision bones move in and out, which was wonderful, which was definitely needed to have happen. You see them moving, and you say, okay, Kathy, well, they moved the bones, the collision bones, so what's the problem? Well, the problem is the collision bones remain straight up and down when they move in and out. And that's the problem. You can see that the collision bone shouldn't remain going straight up and down. Because it remains straight up and down, pant legs and boots and shoes that come up higher on the ankle, if you're trying to make them in a fitted mesh, will break. The mesh, because this is still going straight up and down, the mesh is just moved left and right, straight up and down. So the pant leg just moves to the outside here, straight up and down, or the boot, the top of the boot and calf, and then you'll get down here, and whatever's weighted to the foot will be not moved, and you'll get what looks like a break. Looks like your ankle is broken, or the pants are broken if the pants came down lower. And so and the pants, the whole pant leg just looks like it moves out, in and out. and that's a major problem. So that's why fitted mesh pants and boots do not work with fitted mesh unless you tell the customer they must have their knee angle at 50%. You cannot have it inward or outward. Now, at this point, Linden Lab is not going to change it because they're going to say that it's going to break too much content. And they're probably right. It will break too much content right now because too much content has been made for just a knee angle of 50%. Now, a simple solution that would probably only take about a half hour to set up would be to add 4 more collision bones, 2 for the upper legs and 2 for the lower legs, and have them move in and out just like they do now, but simply have them rotate so that when they rotate, they would... Oh, now Maya's deciding it's going to freeze for a second. So when they rotate, they follow the angle of the mesh. So you'd want it to rotate like that, but only on the X axes. So you'd want it to rotate so it matched up kind of like that. And the same thing for the top. Let's see, now will Maya do it? Okay, I want to get into the X axis, so when I rotate it just rotates. So you'd want it to be something like that. It would be very simple, probably take about a half hour. It's just in the Avatar LAD. They would have to add more bones to the skeleton, the skeleton XML file, the Avatar skeleton XML file. I don't know any coding that they need to do other than that. I'm sure there'd have to be some extra coding somewhere, but it shouldn't take more than a day, and that would solve this particular little problem. I don't think it's going to happen though, but I might get lucky, and maybe a Linden will actually watch my video and say, yeah, that's a good idea, let's do it. But I wouldn't hold my breath. And so that's something you have to really, really know about when you're rigging pants and when you're rigging shoes, if you're going to try to rig fitted mesh shoes. That's one of the big flaws in collision bones that you need to be aware of. And so I hope this is the end of the video. I hope I don't stop recording and realize, oh, I should have said that. So okay, so we'll see you in the next video. And thanks for being either interested in MayaStar or just interested in learning about fitted mesh in general, and thank you for buying MayaStar if you're one of my customers.